Madam President.
The Senator from Maryland.
Madam President, first, let me thank Senator Gillibrand for her leadership on this issue of sexual assaults in our military. I support her amendment. I believe we need to look at a new way to deal with this issue so there's not only confidence within the military, but within our country that sexual assault will not be tolerated in our military and that we have an effective way to deal with it. So I want to thank Senator Gillibrand. It is quite clear, as Senator Reid said, without her leadership, we would not be having these discussions on the floor of the United States Senate today, and I applaud her for that. Madam President, if I could ask that the remainder of my comments be separated in the record.
Without objection.
Madam President, we are now dealing with the NDAA bill, the National Defense Authorization Act, and it's our opportunity as the Senate to weigh in on one of the primary roles of government, and that is the security of our country, how we can support our men and women in our military service, to make sure they have the best equipment and the best support, and live up to our commitments to our veterans when they return to civilian life. That's an awesome responsibility. And I know each of us in our own capacities need to rely on outside help in order to be able to carry out this responsibility. We have staff. In my case, I've been blessed to have a detailee from the Department of Defense from the Air Force. That person is Major Nate Summers. And I mention that because he'll be leaving my assignment very shortly, within the next week or so. And I wanted to take this time to let my colleagues know, but also to let all the members, all the people know that these detailees that are assigned to our office play a critical role. He's helped me in developing provisions that are in the National Defense Authorization Act and amendments that we are offering that deal with military health issues, that deal with regional security concerns, that deal with the impact of sequestration and how we can deal with the impact of sequestration, and to deal with human rights issues with U.S. leadership globally as well as within the military. To say the least, I could not have done this as effectively as I needed to on behalf of the people of Maryland if it was not for Major Nate Summers. He comes to this assignment with an incredible background. His military record is unbelievable. Major Nate Summers has dedicated his life to serving our nation. Nate started his career with the U.S. Air Force in 2001 when he graduated and received his commission through the Officers Training Program at Mississippi State University. He also, I might add, has 2 master's degrees. Nate then went on to serve in Arkansas, Florida, and Virginia, and was deployed in support of both Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation Enduring Freedom. Prior to joining my office, Major Summers served as liaison between Air Combat Command and Air Force Legislative Liaison Directorate on issues ranging from constituent inquiries to weapons systems. Over the course of his incredible career, Major Summers has earned 17 different major awards and decorations, including the Meritorious Service Medal and the Air Force Commendation Medal. He received these awards comes as no surprise to those who know him. Nate demonstrates his extraordinary service to our nation and to our armed forces each and every day. There's hardly a day that goes by that I am not better informed because of his assignment to my Senate office. To say that Major Summers will be missed in my office is an understatement. Nate has truly been an integral part of my staff, whether ensuring that our Maryland veterans get the services they need or advising me on the complex defense issues that were no task Nate could not do or would not do in order to help our office. The Air Force should be proud of this extraordinary talent they have in Major Nate Summers. I thank him for his service to his nation. I also want to take this opportunity to thank Nate's wife and sons for sharing Nate with the U.S. Senate and with his service to our country. With that, Madam President, I would yield the floor.
Madam President.
The Senator from Alaska.
Madam President, yesterday morning I was pleased to be able to come to the floor of the United States Senate, join with a good, strong handful of women on both sides of the aisle to express our joint commitment, really I think the commitment of every member of this body to address the scourge of sexual assault, sexual misconduct within the military. I think it was a good way to start off the debate yesterday on the issue of sexual assault within the military, recognizing that we are coming to different places in terms of how we deal with these very important issues. But ultimately, the goal of each of us is the same. The goal is that we make right for those who are serving our nation, and that when it comes to instances of sexual assault, military sexual trauma, sexual harassment, that really there is no place in our military for this. So it was a good way, again, to start the debate on these very important topics. We use different terminology when we're discussing the issue of military sexual assault. How we define what we're seeking to eradicate, I think, is important. We've used the more generic term sexual assault probably more often to describe the problem that we need to address, but I would suggest that that definition is probably a bit too narrow. I prefer to use the term military sexual trauma, which is the term that the VA, the Veterans Administration, uses to describe a spectrum of harms. Their term, the VA's term, military sexual trauma, means the psychological trauma resulting from a physical assault of a sexual nature, battery of a sexual nature, or sexual harassment which occurred while the veteran was serving. Now, I prefer this term because it emphasizes the various traumas that can occur both with and without physical assaults and batteries. This definition also calls to our attention the fact that whatever the instrument of trauma there are, what we see are psychological scars that need to be addressed. And these are psychological scars that can last a lifetime. And I think it's fair to say that this spectrum of scars is broad and it is deep. Madam President, I have looked very carefully at the work that came out of the Senate Armed Services Committee. I have looked at Senator Gillibrand's amendment very carefully. I have considered all that is being incorporated in the Defense Authorization Bill. And again, as I mentioned yesterday, I'm pleased with how in so many different areas we have been working together to address these issues of military sexual trauma. I am a supporter of Senator Gillibrand's approach to ensure justice for victims of sexual misconduct, military sexual trauma. I'd like to explain some of the reasons why I have chosen to support that approach. I believe that the current system of military judgment relies upon the individual decisions of commanders for a decision on whether or not an offense is to be punished and which charges are to be brought. And in our complex military, there are many, many commanders. We all know that. And while our code of justice, our code of military justice may be uniform, I think that we're seeing strong evidence that its implementation is anything but uniform. Senator Gillibrand's approach ensures that charges will be investigated and that the charging decision will be made by disinterested military prosecutors. Disinterested prosecutors whose only interest is that the perpetrators account for their actions, that victims' interests are protected, and that integrity in the charging decisions is really paramount. And I I think that this is very important. I think that this is actually a breath of fresh air, because the recent experiences that I have had as a senator from Alaska with the transparency of decisions made within the chain of command, I believe, leave much to be desired. And unfortunately, what I have experienced is that in several situations, we have learned about these situations that really, you read the headlines and you say, oh my gosh, I can't believe that this is happening in our military. It makes your stomach turn. But we're not hearing this from the chain of command. We're reading this in our newspapers. We're seeing this reported in the media, and that's our first point of contact with it. And I'll give you a case in point, Madam President. The 49th Missile Defense Battalion, which operates our nation's missile defense at Fort Greely. Very important facility for us in Alaska, very important facility for us throughout the nation. Last spring, it was widely reported that unlawful fraternization among certain members of the battalion rising up into the chain of command was creating an uncomfortable situation for others who were not part of what I would describe the in crowd there at Greeley. And just when I thought I understood what was going on there at Fort Greely, after I was told that, don't worry, everything's all fixed, there was a bizarre series of events that kind of showed up on my doorstep. The complainant, who was a member of the Alaska National Guard, was involved in a child custody dispute with another member of the Alaska National Guard. And for reasons that I don't understand, the complainant's chain of command decided to inject himself into this custody dispute by causing the complainant to be detained in an electrical closet on a secure U.S. military base for a period of days to deny him lawful visitation with his children. Now, all of this is detailed in a sworn affidavit which the complainant submitted to my office. It's also alleged that DOD civilian police and Fort Greely military police were complicit in these actions. I mean, you shake your head. You say, are we supposed to call this military justice? And maybe it's frontier justice. Maybe it's military justice in the last frontier. I don't like it. And I don't think that we should ever accept it. I asked the U.S. Army CID to look into this incident because it was my impression then that an unlawful denial of one's freedom is a criminal offense. And I understand that the complaint from my office was forwarded up, but it was not pursued by Army CID. It was pursued by the Space and Missile Defense Command. And I am most appreciative that an investigation was pursued. But you might legitimately ask the question, so how did it end? What's the outcome of this story? I don't know. I don't know. Alaskans don't know. We don't know. Neither I nor the individual who sought the investigation has been informed of the outcome. Just we were told that the chain of command had looked into it. Where's the transparency here? The complainant has been told that he needs to file a Freedom of Information Act request to find out. Now, Madam President, this just doesn't sit right with me. When we're talking about how we need to make sure that the chain of command is in place, but this is an example of how the chain of command is an impartial, unbiased, vigorous prosecutor of victims. I'm not able to see that in this instance. In this case, it's alleged that the chain of command were either perpetrators or they were complicit with the perpetrators. But again, think of the message that is then sent. Fort Greely is a very small installation. Folks pretty much know what's going on a smaller installation. So you know of this incident. It's been reported in the papers. You're told that, well, chain of command has looked into it, but then nothing after that. Now, I'd like to suggest that that was just it. That's the only thing that we've seen up north. That this is the only incident that has come to my attention. But that's not the case. Literally, less than a month ago, October 27th, the Anchorage Daily News reported on allegations that were made by senior Alaska National Guard chaplains of pervasive and long-standing sexual assault and sexual misconduct within Guard ranks. There were allegations of some 26 different sexual assault and sexual misconduct that was reported in the news. They became aware, the chaplains became aware of these incidents through their own observations and through complaints that were brought to them by Guard members. So I had an opportunity then, back here in Washington, D.C., to ask senior leaders of the National Guard Bureau what they knew about this situation. When did you find out about this situation? And you know what the answer was? They read about it in the news clippings. Really? I mean, it just stuns you when we're talking about how we've got this system where all the way throughout the chain we're addressing this. Well, somewhere there's a broken link in this chain. And again, when the media finds out about it first and reports about it, and the senior leaders back here are unaware of 26 different allegations, it just again causes you to wonder. It's a truism of management that if you want a problem managed, you have to know about it. You've got to measure it, and you've got to let your subordinates know that their performance is being evaluated on that measure. So answer this question. How can the Secretary of Defense and our senior military leaders ever hope to manage the critical problem before us when the facts, and I'm not talking about the number of complaints, but the really deplorable fact situations are buried within a decentralized and certainly in Alaska, a very far-flung chain of command. And how can I develop any sense of comfort that those that are responsible for these activities, these hideous activities, have been brought to justice and not just simply moved around the military? It does cause you to wonder. It's a horrible truth that we are still dealing with in Alaska, but we've all heard and are very aware of the widespread allegations of child sexual abuse within the Catholic Church. And we've come to learn of many of these situations, and then later learned that the Church, in fact, was aware of many of these allegations. And then, unfortunately, a period of time ago, the response to handle some of it was they moved the offending clergy to other places. And we certainly saw, unfortunately, some of them moved to the state of Alaska. And if they acted inappropriately in an urban community, they were shipped out to a bush community, a very remote place, out of sight, out of mind, free to offend. Again, that's not responsibility. That's not accountability. That's not how it should be done, certainly within the church, but most certainly not within our military as well. We've all talked about many of the stories on the floor here, and I will add that the more this issue of military sexual trauma, sexual assault has been discussed here in the Senate, I have had more that have come to me. I was home in the state 2 weeks ago. It was a pretty cold Saturday afternoon, and I was out in a big community event outside, and I was approached by a woman who had seen me from across the street. She was at a conference. She came across the street into the town square. She wasn't wearing a coat. I was prepared for the cold. But she wanted to make sure that I knew that she too had been a victim, but that she had not had the strength to report. She just left. And her ask to me was, don't give up on this, because I had to step down from my military career, and the perpetrator stayed on. And as he stayed on, he continued to be promoted. And her plea to me was, please don't let that continue. I want to share another one that is very, very personal to me. I think all of us as members of the Senate know what a privilege, what an honor it is to nominate qualified constituents to attend our nation's service academies. The military stands very, very tall in the eyes of Alaskans. So in my state, these nominations are highly competitive. Last spring, I became aware that one of my nominees, a young woman that I had been kind of watching as she progressed because I knew of her family, she had been accepted into one of the service academies and had been doing phenomenally. She was sexually assaulted at the academy. She graduated and was commissioned. But now the burden of dealing with the fact that she was not protected from the crime has caused her to resign her commission. So she put 4 years of very hard work, really very hard work, toward a military career, and that's in the garbage. Contacted her just recently, and she's a strong woman, but her dreams have been completely dashed by what she experienced. Now, many of my colleagues know I've taken a keen interest in the work of our service academies. I served for a short time on the Board of Visitors on one of the academies, but I was not aware of the trauma that my constituent had suffered until she contacted me. And I don't recall any substantial discussions of issues like this during my tenure on the Board of Visitors. It needs to be discussed. It needs to be the subject of not only discussion, but action. Action to eliminate that, instances like that from ever happening. So these are all current, but not all of these issues are new. Earlier this year, I came to know a woman by the name of Trina McDonald. She was, at one point in time, had the opportunity to live in the state as a service member. So many of our service members that come to Alaska want to stay there for life. They want to retire. They love it. But unlike many, she chose to really try to forget everything that had been attached to her service in Alaska. She prefers to forget that experience. Many of you may have seen The Invisible War. Ms. McDonald speaks of those experiences that she had when she was assigned to the Navy, when she was out at ADAC, which is now a closed naval base out on the Aleutian Chain. This was about 20 years ago. But Trina asserts that she was repeatedly drugged, raped, and ultimately dumped in the Bering Sea by superior officers. And what did the chain of command do? Trina states that she had no place to turn because both the police and her superiors were the perpetrators. What do you do? Where do you go? Where is the redress? It pains me, Madam President, to think that the issues which today are very high in attention of this body, that these have been out here for 20-plus years. I've listened to my colleagues on the floor here talk about tailhook. We've talked about so many of the other high-profile instances where we have heard our military leaders say, never again, zero tolerance. They're using all the right words. But it really does cause you to question, are we to attribute this cycle that we're seeing to attention deficit on the part of us here in Congress? or attention deficit on the part of our military leaders. This is not what zero tolerance looks like. And whatever the case, I think it's going to take some very strong medicine to break through this powerful attention deficit that we have seen historically. Incremental steps, in my view, they don't cut it anymore. The young woman whose military career is no longer, the woman that I met out in the cold 2 weeks ago who gave up her dream and has just had to stand by and watch her perpetrator ascend his career ladders. Incremental measures don't cut it. I think that it is time for profound change. I think the amendment that is offered by the senator from New York, well, it is strong medicine. I acknowledge that. I think it is the right tool for what we are dealing with at this time. With that, I want to thank the President, and I yield the floor.
The senator from Iowa.
I would like to reiterate my strong support for Senator Gillibrand's reforms to the military justice system. I'm an original co-sponsor, proud to be there, of this act, and I should add that it has been a pleasure working with Senator Gillibrand on the issue. Her passion and commitment to rooting out sexual assault in the military ought to be inspiring to all of us, and watching how she negotiates and how she lobbies for her ideas can teach all of us a good lesson. I should also add that I appreciate the work of the Armed Services Committee, which added a large number of common sense reforms to the underlying bill. In fact, some of them are so common sense that you have to wonder why the military hasn't adopted them already, or, if needed be, asked for legislation to do so before now. For instance, the bill before us provides people convicted of certain sexual assault offenses may not join the armed forces. Common sense. Requires mandatory discharge from the armed forces of any member convicted of certain sexual assault offenses. Common sense. And directs a comprehensive review of the adequacy of training pertaining to sexual assault prevention and response. Common sense. The underlying bill also has a number of provisions to address certain concerns about commanding officers not handling sexual assault charges properly, but still keeps this judicial process in the chain of command. That is inappropriate, hence this amendment. We've tried working within the current system. This isn't a new issue. Military leaders have been making emphatic promises about tackling the problem of sexual assault for years and years, but the problem only seems to be getting worse. What's more, the current system appears to be part of the problem. There's a culture that has to change, and it won't change by itself. According to a recent Defense Department report, 50% of female victims stated they did not report the crime. Why? Because they believe that nothing would be done with their report. 74% of females, 60% of males perceive one or more barriers to reporting sexual assault. 62% of the victims who reported a sexual assault indicated they received some form of professional, social, or administrative retaliation. This should not happen in a military where everybody ought to be looking out for everybody else. A very close worked unit is essential for everybody's protection, but also for the success of the mission. So it is a terrible deterrent when sexual assaults ought to be reported 100%, but aren't. If sexual assault cases are not reported, well, it's quite obvious. Common sense tells you they can't be prosecuted. If sexual assault isn't prosecuted, common sense ought to tell us it leads to predators remaining in the military and a perception that that sort of activity will be tolerated or you can get away with it. And common sense tells us that people get away with it. By allowing this situation to continue, we're putting at risk the men and women who have volunteered to place their lives on the line. We're also seriously damaging military morale and military readiness, taking prosecutions out of the hands of commanders and giving them to professional prosecutors who are independent of the chain of command will help ensure impartial justice for the men and women in uniform. I know some senators will be nervous about the fact that the military is lobbying against this legislation. There's a certain awe that permeates among senators when people with stars on their shoulders appear among us. We're being asked once again, that environment's here, to wait and see if the latest attempt to reform the current system will do the trick. I would respond that the time for trying tweaks to the current system and waiting for another report or study has long since passed. We also hear that this measure will affect the ability of commanders to retain good order and discipline. I'd like to be clear that we in no way take away the ability of commanders to punish troops under their command for their military infractions. Commanders also can and should be held accountable for the climate under their command. But the point here is sexual assault is a law enforcement matter, not a military one. If anyone wants official assurances that we're on the right track, we can take confidence in the fact that an advisory committee appointed by the Secretary of Defense himself supports our reforms. On September 27th this year, the Defense Advisory Committee on Women in the Services, and I believe that acronym is DACOWITS, voted overwhelmingly in support of each of the components of the Military Justice Improvement Amendments. This advisory committee isn't something new. These various advisory committees under different secretaries of defense have been around since 1951 when they were created by then Secretary of Defense George C. Marshall. The committee is composed of civilian and retired military men and women who are appointed by the Secretary of Defense to provide advice and recommendations on matters and policies relating to the recruitment and retention, treatment, employment, and integration and well-being of highly qualified professional women in the armed forces. Historically, this advisory committee's recommendations have been very instrumental in effecting changes to laws and policies pertaining to military women. The bottom line is this, and again, common sense. This isn't some advocacy group or fly-by-night panel. It's a long-standing advisory committee handpicked by the Secretary of Defense, and it supports the substance of our amendment to a T. I know it's easier to support incremental reforms. That's even prudent in some cases. However, when we're talking about something as serious and life-altering as sexual assault, we cannot afford to wait any longer than we already have. Our men and women serving this military deserve bold action to solve this problem, not in a few years or a little bit at a time, but right now. So I would urge my colleagues to be bold and join us in this effort. It's the right thing to do. It seems to me like a lot of debates in this body get complicated. And this one seems to be complicated too by some people. But it's really a very simple issue. Doesn't need to be this complicated because it talks about changing the culture. Now, I know there's cultures in every bureaucracy that need to be changed that affects their operations, but none of them are as damaging as the #1 responsibility of the federal government. So a culture in the Defense Department has to be taken seriously. Got to change the culture. When you join the military, and I haven't been in the military, so I don't speak with authority on this, but it seems to me as I understand the military, I have a grandson in the Marines, had sons in the military, but when you join because you feel everybody in the units, you're going to have each other's back. There should be no fear of anyone in the unit. There should be nothing but respect for each other. You should have confidence in each other. You should have loyalty towards each other. You're all on the same mission. None of them should be considered your enemy. None of them should have any particular power over you. And that's what this sexual assault thing is all about. Power over weak individuals. Not weak because of who they are, but weak because of the power of the people above. This is badly needed legislation. I yield the floor.
President. The senator from North Dakota.
Thank you so much. This is a tough issue. It's a tough issue because good people don't agree. Good people don't see the issue the same way. But we cannot lose sight of the fact that so many of the reforms that we will be voting on to guarantee a safe haven, can guarantee a safe experience, a common camaraderie. They're all parts of a big plan for change. And what we're debating today is one small portion of that. Not small in the sense of impact, but we need to make sure that we reward all of the great work that the committee has done, the great work that's been done with the leadership of Senator McCaskill from the great state of Missouri, and the commitment that this body is making today in a very unified way to change the outcome. And so I just want to spend a moment with that in mind, talking about how I came to my decision to support the Gillibrand amendment. I want to first talk about my experience. I'm probably one of the few people in this body who has actually sat across a table and as somebody who had the power to make the decision on whether we were going to in fact pursue a prosecution and have that discussion. And I know that's a shared experience that I have with Senator McCaskill, and those are experiences we'll never forget, the damage that is done so often when people are victims of sexual assault, beyond other kinds and other forms of physical assault, the power and the responsibility. And so I recognize the great need that we have to deal with this issue. I recognize the great need that we have to have professionals make the decision. And the bottom line for me was if someone came and you suspected an appendicitis, you wouldn't ask the commanding officer to make the decision for the doctor. And what I'm suggesting today, that these are very difficult decisions on whether you're going to pursue or decline a prosecution, and they should be made by people who are trained. And there should be a whole system, as we have seen in the civil side, a whole system of support. You know, frequently we talk about, you know, back in the 80s and the 90s, as we were moving through these same questions in the civil courts, we talked about not re-victimizing the victim. And I think what you're hearing today is story upon story where victims of sexual assault in the military feel not only let down, but they feel re-victimized. And so I want to just very quickly go through a couple of the couple of the points that we've heard over and over again, which is that this change in the Gillibrand Amendment would affect good order and discipline in the military. And I've heard this from many of the good military leaders who have come to my office to talk about this problem, that they need this authority, this specific convening authority, because their orders will fall on deaf ears or their leadership will be questioned. You know, I'm not an expert in leadership, but I have to tell you, do we really believe that that sort of authority is truly essential to being someone that the troops will follow, someone who demands respect, who inspires devotion, or truly will stand and fight side by side no matter what the cost? And the conclusion that I make is that I don't think so, because when I talk to our brave veterans in North Dakota or our non-commissioned officers who lead our service members every single day, that's not what I hear. I hear, I knew he'd do the same for me, not, well, he has convening authority. That's what I believe inspires and maintains good order and discipline, the shared values of the mission, of trust, of concern and respect. I also have heard great reforms, especially in the Air Force, which is, we have a special relationship in North Dakota to the Air Force, having 2 air bases. And the Air Force, JAG came in and told me about the new process and the new procedures and impressed upon me this great opportunity that they had taken now for change. And I said one thing. I said it's too late. It's too late to expect that we are going to believe it this time. You know, the old adage, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. We're at that point now where something very dramatic needs to happen in order to send the very important message that you matter, and this behavior does not reflect behavior that is becoming of our troops, of our country, and the people who step up to serve our country. And so progress that's been made doesn't go far enough. I think it's time to boldly act and step up for people who serve, who stepped up bravely and said, what can I do, no matter the cost or the sacrifice? And knowing the hardship they will endure and the distance from home and family, that love and care for them, that they may go when they go, that our military says, I'm yours. I will go and do whatever I need to do, whatever you tell me to protect our values and to protect our way of life. It seems a small thing to do everything that we can do to protect those who protect us. And this is, the time has come. The time is to address this, to send a strong and important message to our volunteer service that we will not tolerate this, and that we will put this decision in the hands of the people who are best equipped to make this important decision, and that is the prosecutors. Thank you so much. I yield the floor. And I note the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
The senator from Tennessee.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I ask consent the quorum be vitiated.
Without objection.
I ask consent that I be allowed to speak as of in morning business for 10 minutes without taking time from either side.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I thank the senator from Texas and the senator from Missouri for their courtesy, and I'll endeavor to do it in a little quicker than 10 minutes. Madam President, this weekend Vanderbilt plays Tennessee in a football game in Knoxville. And let's say Vanderbilt gets on the 1-yard line of Tennessee, and Tennessee then says, well, we're the home team. Let's add 20 yards or whatever it takes to win the game. Or let's say in the World Series recently, the Red Sox were behind St. Louis in the 9th inning, And the Red Sox said, well, we're the home team, let's add a couple of innings or whatever it takes to win the game. Everyone, I think, would say, Madam President, that that's cheating. Everyone would say you're destroying the game of football or baseball. If a home team could change the rules at any time during the game, or whatever it takes to win the game, what kind of game is it? That's what Senator Vandenberg said after World War II, and Senator Levin repeated to all of us, that a Senate in which a majority can change the rules anytime the majority wants to change the rules is a Senate without any rules. Yet we hear that's what the Democratic majority may be seeking to do this week. They're unhappy, they say, that Republicans have said it's premature to vote up or down on 3 circuit judges nominated by President Obama, even though that was exactly the position of the Democratic senators in 2006 and 2007, when they argued that the D.C. Circuit Court is underworked and that we should transfer judges from where they're needed the most, from the least to where they're needed the most. So we're going to change the rules of the game during the game or whatever it takes to get the results we want. We have a lot of new senators, Madam President, on both sides of the aisle. Maybe half the Senate is in its first term. It's important for them to remember that in Senator Reid's book, he said that to do this would be the end of the United States Senate. That Senator Robert Byrd, probably the most distinguished Senate historian in its history, said in his last speech to us that the filibuster is the necessary fence against the excesses of the majority and of the executive. It is the fence against what de Tocqueville called in the early 1830s the greatest danger to our country he saw, which was the tyranny of the majority. Now you may ask, how could this possibly happen? Here's how I'm afraid it is. Sometimes we get off in our rooms by ourselves, and Republicans do it as well as Democrats, and we give ourselves our own version of the facts. The last time this came up, we tried to address this in the Senate chamber. I think all of us thought it was a pretty good session. But this is my 3rd time to respond to these nuclear threats, and I'm not going to do it again, Madam President. The President said during the government shutdown that he wasn't going to negotiate with a gun to his head. Neither am I. The Democrats have had their finger on the nuclear button for 2 years. I hope they'll reconsider. Number one, I hope they'll read Senator Leahy's letter, which I ask unanimous consent to put in the record.
Without objection.
It was signed in 2006 and 7 by all the Democratic members of the Judiciary Committee, Senator Leahy, Senator Feinstein, Senator Kennedy, Senator Biden, Senator Schumer. It said under no circumstances should we add a judge to the D.C. Circuit when it's so underworked. And so the Republican president and the Democratic Senate agreed with that, reduced by 1 judge. It's the same argument being made today. Number 2. Any suggestion that the President's nominations are being held up is completely wrong. I invited the Congressional Research Service into my office. I asked that question. They've said no. President Obama's nominations in his 2nd term are being considered at about the rate of those of President Clinton and President George W. Bush. On every senator's desk is an executive calendar. Every person who could be confirmed by the Senate is on this calendar. There are about 11 pages. The one who's been on there the longest goes back to February, but all the rest of them go back just to September 12th, just a few weeks. Most of them have been there just 3 or 4 weeks. So, Madam President, people aren't being held up. The only person who can be reported to the Senate floor is by a Democratic committee. The only person who can bring them from the calendar to be confirmed is the Democratic leader. Why doesn't he bring them to the floor and let them be confirmed? And in the history of the Senate, Madam President, and this is from the Congressional Research Service, there have only been 16 executive nominees in its history who failed to be seated because of a filibuster vote, a failed cloture vote. There have been 2 under the Clinton administration, 2 in the Bush administration, 2 in the Obama nomination. There have been 5 Bush circuit judges and 5 Obama circuit judges. Never a Supreme Court justice. There was a little exception with Abe Fortas which was different. Never a district court judge and never a cabinet member denied a seat by a filibuster. So where's the crisis? Madam President, in conclusion, I would make this suggestion. I think what makes Americans angry about Obamacare is the wrong direction, is the 3,000-page bill, but as much as anything else is the raw exercise of political power in the middle of the night during a snowstorm to pass a bill by a partisan vote without a single bipartisan vote. If the Democrats proceed to use the nuclear option in this way, it will be Obamacare too. It will be the raw exercise of political power to say we can do whatever we want to do. Grantland Rice, a famous sports writer, once said, it's not whether you win or lose, it's how you play the game. In this case, it's not so much what the rule is, it's how you change the rule. There have always been a few senators on either side of the aisle who care enough about our institution and enough about our constitutional checks and balances to stop a stampede that we will later regret. I hope that will be true again. I hope we will resist turning the Senate into an institution where the home team can cheat to win the game, to get whatever result it wants at any time it wants. Because as Senator Vandenberg said, and Senator Levin has repeated, a Senate where a majority can change the rules anytime it wants is a Senate without any rules at all. I ask consent to include a one-page summary of the 16 nominations that have been not confirmed after a failed cloture vote, which according to the Congressional Research Service is the entire number in the history of the United States Senate that have ever been denied their seat by a filibuster.
Is there objection? Without objection. Senator from the Assistant Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I'm going to just take a few minutes to respond to the statement just made by my colleague from Tennessee and my friend, Lamar Alexander. We have a circumstance here in the United States Senate which is...
On whose time does the Senator speak?
I'm sorry, I didn't know we were on controlled time, so I'll yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The Senator from Texas.
Mr. President, I rise in support of the Gillibrand amendment. I am proud to support Senator Gillibrand's concerted effort to deal with the problem of sexual assault in our military. And I want to begin by commending her persistent leadership in forging a bipartisan coalition to tackle this serious problem. I supported the Gillibrand amendment in committee, and I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of the amendment here on the floor of the Senate. And I rise today to share my reasons for supporting it and to urge my colleagues to continue to come together in support of this amendment. Everyone in this body wants to support the men and women of our military. And in the course of the Senate Armed Services Committee hearings on sexual assault, we heard testimony after testimony after testimony about the persistent problem of sexual assault in the military. And I found myself persuaded by the arguments that Senator Gillibrand raised in defense of her amendments. Indeed, when I said at the hearing that I had been persuaded by the arguments, I have to tell you afterwards a reporter from a newspaper came up to me astonished and asked in wonderment, were you really persuaded by arguments at a hearing? I thought everyone came in with their views already set in stone and nothing that was said here made a difference. And I chuckled and said, well, the arguments that Senator Gillibrand put forth I found powerful in terms of how do we deal with a serious problem. There were two arguments in particular, Mr. President, that I found persuasive. The first is that sexual assault has proven to be a persistent problem in the military. According to the Defense Department, 3,374 cases of unwanted sexual contact were reported last year, and more than 23,000 additional cases of unwanted sexual contact went unreported. This has been a problem that has been present in the military for decades. And our commanders, our generals, our admirals have worked in good faith, have worked diligently to correct this problem. It has proven a persistent problem, and yet, unfortunately, their efforts to correct the problem have not proven successful. In the civilian side, one of the great challenges when it comes to sexual assault are the relatively low rates of reporting, and sadly, on the military side, that problem is even greater. The most significant barrier we see to deterring and preventing sexual assault is that many of the victims are unwilling, are not comfortable coming forward and reporting the assaults that they are experiencing. And despite the repeated good faith efforts of our military commanders, we have been unable to fix that problem. The second argument that Senator Gillibrand raised that I found quite persuasive is that a number of our allies, including Great Britain, including Israel, including Canada, including Germany, have implemented reforms quite similar to the reform she's proposing, which is namely that the decision whether to bring a prosecution for a crime like sexual assault should be made by an impartial military prosecutor and not by the commanding officer, who may well be the commanding officer both of the victim of the crime and the perpetrator of the crime. Those reforms have been implemented in our allies, and our allies have not seen good order and discipline undermined, and indeed, the data suggests that they've seen an increase in reporting rates. Those are the arguments that persuaded me that we need to solve this problem, we need to stop this problem. And let me point out that the coalition supporting the Gillibrand Amendment is a bipartisan coalition. This cuts across party lines, and in my view, there are two strong conservative principles, both of which the Gillibrand Amendment furthers. Number one, all of us want to strengthen our military, ensure that good order and discipline is protected, that our commanders are effective, that we maintain the strongest fighting force on the face of the planet. But number two, all of us want to prevent and deter violent crime and to ensure that anyone that commits violent crime, and in particular a crime of a sexual nature, meets swift and sure punishment. Prior to being elected in the Senate, I spent many years in law enforcement working to ensure that those guilty of violent crimes, and in particular crimes of sexual violence against children, against women, receive the swiftest and surest punishment. In my view, the Gillibrand Amendment furthers both of those conservative objectives. You know, I've tried to think about this issue not just from the perspective of a United States Senator, but also from the perspective of a father. My wife and I have two little girls, Caroline and Catherine, who are 5 and 3. And I've tried to think if some years hence Caroline or Catherine make the decision to step forward and volunteer to serve in our armed forces, what are the rules I would want to be in place to ensure that my daughters were protected against any risk of sexual assault? Given the 2-decade-plus history that we have seen in the military of not being able to effectively prevent these crimes and not having victims willing to come forward and report, in my view, shifting not to a civilian authority, but to an impartial military prosecutor is going to significantly increase the reporting rates, which in turn is going to deter these crimes from being committed. All of us owe a duty to our soldiers, our sailors, airmen and Marines, the young men and women who voluntarily step forward to risk everything to defend our nation. And for one of those young soldiers to find himself or herself the victim of sexual assault is an absolute violation of that trust. The Supreme Court has referred to rape as, short of murder, the ultimate violation of self. All of us have an obligation to make sure we are protecting our soldiers. And, you know, an environment where young men and women in the military fear the risk of sexual assault or are not able to come forward and report those crimes is not an environment that furthers good order and discipline. And so I would encourage all of my friends in this body, both Democrats and Republicans, to come together in support of this common sense proposal to strengthen our military and at the same time to deter and punish the unacceptable, unspeakable crimes of sexual assault so that we can together honor the commitment we owe to all the men and women of the military. Thank you, Mr. President. and I note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Mr. President.
The senator from New Hampshire.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to talk about a very important issue, and that is the issue of sexual assault in
The Senate is in